There were about 46 rugby matches at international level played over this weekend. By my count, there are about 13 particularly notable ones with teams that might qualify for a World Cup. And I think it is high time that we dig into them in a show that we will come up with a name for. But all of these shows where they go through rugby and they talk about them, they just take some bit of terminology, So it's like it's Scrum 5, the breakdown, all of those, right? So I thought...
the pass into touch.
Yeah, the pass into touch, the goal line drop out. I was thinking maybe the line out around halfway.
Yeah.
So welcome to...
How about the swimming through the side?
Yeah, welcome to the 22 dropout off a missed drop goal attempt from around 58 metres.
You know what? You didn't sell me at first, but you clawed it back.
Yeah.
You clawed it back.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
So...
The Border Chamberlain special.
This is welcome to Border Chamberlain's Show of Wonders. He will not be featuring or mentioned again under threat of violence.
Noted.
And lawyers.
Noted.
Border Chamberlain's lawyers have been in touch and said,
You've just mentioned him.
Do not mention him again.
You've just mentioned him.
After the second minute of this video.
Okay, we'll verify it.
We're skating on thin ice. So, whole bunch of internationals played this weekend. We're going to try and go through as many as humanly possible over the course of however long we give ourselves here. Want to begin with Italy against Argentina.
Yeah, that was a really good game to watch. It was interesting because it's two teams who are very kind of expressive in attack, but in different ways. I was most excited to watch Italy of basically any team this weekend. They've kind of become a favourite team, attacking-wise, in terms of the structure they play. I really liked in the Six Nations the thing that they did with playing a kind of 2-4-2 system, playing loads of options off that group of four in the middle that they usually have. And they did try and do that this weekend, but it didn't quite click for them in attack. And it was a bit frustrating.
So we're going to get very technical right away.
Yes, sorry.
But that's how we do things on the...
Redacted.
Show. Thank you. But I think a big part of the issue with Italy at the minute in this game, right, is the balance of their pack is enormously off. Mm-hmm. And I thought this was a fantastic game. It's a broad impression. I thought it was really good fun. I thought it was the most comprehensively I've ever seen a team win a tight game.
Sure.
That game felt very back and forth. The two teams were pretty level, and then Argentina scored 50 points. Because there were loads of chances both teams created, but Argentina finished more of Italy's chances than Italy did.
Yeah.
You had the Malaya, breakaway try. You had those constant chances, and Argentina were also finishing their own chances, and that kind of led to things getting massively, out of hand. And I think a big part of Italy's issue is that their pack is really badly kind of set together to play together. We're coming out of this era of Italy just picking the 15 good players they have as a starting 15, right? And now they've got enough players that need to be looking at it and going, do these players fit together? Do they work as a cohesive unit? And I don't think that back row and that second row they picked do work. Especially, the front row as well, they picked Spaniolo to focus on the scrum over Fischetti, who's more of a kind of workhorse in the loose.
I thought Spaniolo played very well.
I thought he played very well.
Also, I think Fischetti off the bench was outstanding.
Yeah.
And I think that works as an axis, but I think it worked whichever way around you pick it.
Yeah.
Because they're both top-class players.
And we also have Thomas Gaggio, the other Benetton prop there as well, who is brilliant. I think there's a fundamental issue of the way that Italy attack, right? Which is that they use primarily Federico Ruzza and Michele Lamoureux, their second row and their seven, as their main edge forwards, right? And yet that leaves, when you take into consideration, Spaniolo had that brilliant solo try disallowed, but
robbed.
He is less of a workhorse carry. He carries less often than Fischetti does. He offers himself less often. And none of that front row, great players though they are, I think it's a really good pack, are proper ball carriers, in the style of a Dan Sheehan or a Dewi Lake or a Malcolm Marks. And then you look at the second row, right? The other second row being Nicolo Canone, who is hits tons of rucks, clears out, works brilliant as a latch
His
player.
ball handling's his thing rather than his ball carrying.
A bit like an Adam Beard type, who carrying isn't his thing, but he has so many other uses that you have to pick him, right? That leaves basically on his own Lorenzo Canone, his brother, as their primary carrier. And yet he is the sort of a great turn of pace, has great hands, and he works really well in those wide channels, right? And then Six Nations are using him in those wide channels to carry. And yet, the moment he is your only carrier, the moment he's the guy you're relying on to get you front foot ball, that doesn't work, right? Suddenly you're sending him into traffic. He's not a guy who's going to make you 5 metres in traffic.
Yeah.
And they don't have that, right? Especially because they use Brex, the centre, so often as a first receiver, that he's often the guy they're playing off, allowing Garbisi to get in the next bit of space, and then use Menoncello in the wide channels as a carrying option as well. That actually, once they replace Brex, who's been having such a good year, but once they replaced him with Marco Zanon, they actually had 2 players being direct in those channels as well as Canone.
Yeah.
And I think you need to make a change to this team somewhere because they don't have anyone punching up the guts, and it meant that they were playing a lot of very expansive plays that could work and were good plays off ball that wasn't going forward, so it's just entirely neutral.
Yeah, because of the way Italy like to play, where they have sort of 3 or 4 men in a pod, and they're all genuine options, right? Rather than it always just kind of goes to the guy ahead, because they like to have that deception. You're right, Lorenzo Canone works more as when he's kind of your secondary carrier, rather than you're sending everything through him, right? Look at in the Six Nations when they brought in Ross Vincent, or even when they had Isaac or Favretto, all of these guys who are brutal, like low to the ground carriers. And as you say, like Lorenzo Canone is brilliant because carrying is kind of his second best thing, and he is a phenomenal carrier.
Yeah.
But as you say, like it's giving those balls out the back, you know, those little quick flip on balls are kind of his USP as a number 8.
If Italy could have 16 players and put Vincent in as well, I think they'd be brilliant.
Yeah.
But the problem is, you need to take one of these players that's crucial to them, right? So Nicola Canone and Sebastian Negri are both critical in terms of how they play, their workhorse rate, like Negri particularly defensively. They're brilliant players, and they're critical to this team, right? Their front row, they physically don't have a hooker in the mould of, you know, a Dewi Lake who's kind of a second number 8, right?
Yeah.
They don't have that. And so you're kind of left with the situation where they don't have enough players to play. If it was 16 on 16, I think Italy would have done much better than they did with 15 versus 15, or even when it was 14 versus 14. Like, I think there was just like, there's some issue in how they set up there. They're not getting to go forward in order to play the stuff that really suits them.
Yeah. And the back line were clearly quite frustrated, you know? Like, Menoncello had a massive first half, you know, he carries ball for so many yards. But when they get to the second half and a few things went against them in terms of Argentina scoring tries and like them not finishing chances and so on, you've got that moment where Marco Zanon comes into the line and kicks the ball away from that grubber kick, just because they kind of had that thing in their head clearly of like, oh, we've got to score in every phase rather than actually backing our phase play here, which goes completely against how Italy have played in the Six Nations in the summer and everything. Lewis Liner making errors in the air, giving away penalties and so on. It's so frustrating to watch, you know?
I think Garbisi's kicking game's come on enormously.
Yeah.
And that's something to look forward to going to the Six Nations. I think that's promising. And I think there's an awful lot of positives around Italy. And it says a lot that we're really frustrated about this game. You know, when you go back 5 years, and this was a pretty solid performance, you know? The fact they made Argentina sweat, and ultimately they lost heavily, but who cares? Now it feels like it's unacceptable for them. And they feel like a much different and better team. And just talk about Argentina a bit.
Yeah.
I thought they were superb, really. They just let Italy play into their hands. They were very patient. And I think that's something that Contepomi's finally brought to them. Because it's not something you can say about a lot of Argentine teams of past, is that they wait and they're happy for the opposition to make errors in order to then play.
It's discipline and patience are the two things that Contepomi has ironically brought to this Argentine team, which I don't think anybody called.
No.
But it worked for them against the All Blacks. You know, it worked for them against the Springboks, worked for them against the Wallabies, you know, and now they've done exactly the same thing. They know how Italy are going to play, and they know it is an extremely high-risk brand of rugby, and they let them make those risks. Sort of stood off a little bit in defence, kind of went for a bit more of a kind of like drift-style defence, knowing that, you know, and there was that try that they scored early on where Italy throw a pass that's seemingly going to touch, they pick it up and they go the distance, you know.
I thought they're just becoming so much more consistent. They're becoming the team we kind of all wanted Argentina to be for a long time. And I'd be so interested to see how they go against Ireland. Because after the last time they went to the Viva, they were smashed. And this is a huge chance for them to put down a marker and say, like, actually, we can be consistent. You know?
100%.
Because we've seen it so many times where Argentina put in a brilliant performance one week, then the next week they can't back it up. Right? And this year, yes, they lost much more heavily to New Zealand after they beat them. But I think that performance was still up a gear on where it's been in past.
Yeah, so too the Springboks, of course. Couldn't do tricks on the trot.
I think Argentina played well in that game, but the Springboks were just in a kind of...
I think both of those are more remarking the opposition than the Pumas themselves.
I think that game was like a perfectly good performance by Argentina. I don't think they were terrible. I just think the Springboks hit a level... It was one of the Springboks' best performances to Raj Erasmus. Like, it was right up there as like top 3.
Yeah, most complete.
And they just completely smashed them. And obviously they had the discipline issues as well and the cards. And the moment it went down to 13, it was just over. And I think next week is such an interesting game to know how good Argentina are. Because at the minute, we know where their ceiling is, or we can see where their ceiling is. We know where they are when they're having a good game, but we sort of don't know how far down it goes, right?
Sure.
And then taking on an Ireland team who will be pissed off, who will be focused, and will be so big in on the details, they're going to be a really good test there.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, again, like that whole thing of them being really patient in D, will that work against Ireland? I think it's kind of impossible to tell, because all of the teams who've beaten Ireland haven't been like that.
Yeah,
you know, you've got like New Zealand, who really took them on defensively, like were really aggressive, really physical. South Africa, much the same. You know what you're getting from them any time they win a game defensively. You know, one thing I want to say more about Argentina before we finish on them. Santiago Cordero.
His finish, superb.
Like, how good.
Yeah.
How good.
Brilliant.
And again, just like every time we got the ball, we were deprived of Ange Capuozzo in that game. And then later on in the game, and the opposition, you get Santiago Cordero coming on. And it is every counter-attack, every time he joined the line, and as you say, that finish that he did, how good.
So to just move on, right? We'll keep running along. Worth saying that on this show, which is called that bit where you take your boots off and you clap them together like that to get all the
Oh, that's good.
That's the name of the show. It needs a gesture though, so you can't really write it down. You can't get it in a thumbnail, can you? We're going to leave the Ireland-New Zealand game, the England-Australia game, and the West Fiji game. West Fiji will do it elsewhere on this channel, and the other two will cover on the main channel in more detail, in more deep divey nature.
It's a busy week.
It's a busy week. But I do want to move on, but keep the theme of South American country coming over and playing a team from mainland Europe, and have a look at, quickly, Spain versus Uruguay. Because this game in the morning before the other test kicked off, I thought really, really solid game. You had to make an account on the Spanish website in order to view it, but I did that. I went through that in order to watch my boys play my other boys. You could just sit there and shout "Vamos," and it cheered everyone on. It was great. I think we need to view Spain as a serious, serious team now. I thought they looked like a proper team, They looked like the World Cup contenders they are and could have been so easily last year, if not for the thing that happened. That first half, they absolutely shut down Uruguay. Uruguay looked like they barely had an idea. They barely had a thought that could get past them. The Spanish pack was incredibly physical, fronted up, defended incredibly well, carried hard. Then Martiano Cian, the winger, is box office. He's superb. He's great fun whenever he gets the ball. And I just think there's this Spain team are going places,
Yeah.
And I think there's some worries around Uruguay's depth because they are a tiny country with a tiny player pool. Yeah. And once you take a handful of their key players out, which happened this weekend, they look like a team that is incredibly limited. Yeah. And their maul went incredibly well. They got those couple of tries straight before and after half time. But there is a worry around, can they produce just enough players to remain competitive at the level they've been at? And especially as these players start to age out. That first generation of players that got them into the World Cup are gone now. Omachea retire a month or so ago, and those are starting to happen more and more often.
Yeah, and there's a big gap between, the majority of the first team players for Uruguay are in either the top 14 or Pro D2.
Yeah.
And when you take those guys out, you're plucking from kind of like Super Rugby Americas.
Yeah.
Whatever, it's kind of like that kind of tier of rugby. And it's a huge jump, And I suppose that it will bridge the gap, that Uruguay needs tests like that ahead of the next World Cup, because it will happen at some point. You'll have your Echeverry something will be unavailable for a game.
He was,
just played.
Didn't play this weekend,
exactly. He's just played 4 days prior or whatever, and then you've got the All Blacks on a Saturday. And you have to be able to substitute players in and have that for a World Cup.
And I think in some ways it's an important game for Uruguay, but they lost. They had a pretty good fight back to get back in it, having been pretty far behind. But I do think Spain just looked the better coach team and looked better put together, better prepared. It was much closer to Spain's first 15. They were maybe missing 2 or 3 players versus Uruguay missing sort of maybe 8 or 9, especially from the 23 overall. But yeah, I think this Spain team are going places. I'm so excited to see more of them because obviously the thing looming over all the Tier 2 nations here is World Cup qualification next year. And Spain have to be so confident in their chances. And I'm really excited to dig into them properly. The Netherlands had a game cancelled this weekend, so they didn't play. But those two are going to be properly battling it out because both of them are on such an upwards trajectory. Spain in particular, I think.
Those two and Belgium are really going to battle with each other to try and get to that bubbling like extra Europe spot, aren't they? You know, that all of those really competitive with Portugal earlier this year in the Rugby Europe Championship. So that is so exciting.
Speaking of Portugal, should we quickly touch on Portugal as well?
Let's talk about Portugal.
So I think we both only watched the highlights of this game.
Yes.
But do want to give a mention to it. USA, fantastic late victory, trying the 77th minute to beat Portugal in Portugal. This is obviously a replay of the game that ended in a draw and saw Portugal qualify for the Rugby World Cup last year. Game obviously from 2 years ago. But I think a huge statement win for the USA.
Yeah. It seems, from what we can tell, like Portugal really in the ascendancy for the majority of the game. But the USA just staying enough in touch, you know, that they could get there in the end.
I think ultimately the critical thing, right, is Scott Lawrence, the USA coach, has generally talked about character as being his main thing that he wants from his team, you know? And the number of times he said things about players that are American qualified but haven't volunteered to play for them, he said he isn't interested. He isn't going to chase any player. He isn't going to go after anyone that's, you know, not interested in playing for the USA. He wants Americans. He wants to build a very American team that's very proud of that. And I think that kind of spirit and togetherness and everything he's building showed in them staying in the game and coming through. And that is a sort of win he wants to build this World Cup on.
But on the Portuguese side of things as well, obviously, Jose Lima with an absolutely phenomenal try. Yeah. The balance on that guy. I mean, the Portuguese backline is something that we could talk about all day for weeks. Rafael Storti, our boy, he's just been tearing down trees for Stade Francais in the top 14 and, comes straight back in for Portugal and does that thing that he does.
He's so good. Yeah. He's so good. He's just one of those players that is just bullshitting, just do something with nothing. He's brilliant.
But I think it's one of those games where, regardless of who wins it, you turn around and you go, that's a brilliant result for whoever it is. Because these two teams are on a really even playing field at the moment. And I think that if these two played each other weekly in the Autumn Nations kind of series, then they would both get a lot out of it. And 100%.
Fitting that the biggest game between the two ever was a draw, right? Yeah, and obviously one team won that draw, but it was a draw nonetheless.
Yeah.
So, should we dance along?
Let's dance along.
To France v Japan.
Yeah.
A fun game, if not the most competitive and evenly fought.
Yeah, France are serious, man. It was really quite reassuring because obviously after the Six Nations, there was a little bit of you that goes, oh, is Galtier's France not invincible, you know?
But since Laurent Labide moved on, right?
Yes.
Who was their previous attack coach, long-term partner of Galtier, and he left. He's now head coach of Stade Francais.
Yeah, which made you think maybe he was the whole string.
How much was he holding it up?
Yeah,
how much was he the tactical side versus Galtier being the kind of.
And I still think that's obviously a factor.
Yeah.
And we have to say that Japan were nowhere near the best, nowhere near the standard.
But this is the interesting thing I thought about Japan, right? Is you look at their game against Tier 1 nations this year, right? So the All Blacks and England, and in both those games they were irresistible and brilliant for the first 15 minutes. They completely outplayed their opposition for 10, 15 minutes, and they scored tries and they got into early leads and they easily could have created 2 or 3 more, and they just played for a pace that they couldn't keep up with. And then ultimately, they couldn't keep up with it themselves, and they fell off enormously. And what we saw was France just shut that down, you know? There was a chance for Warner Dunes with the charge down early on, and then beyond that, Japan sort of just didn't get into their game. And France were ruthless, not to get too heavily into the Antoine Dupont Wankfest early, which is what we should call the show, actually, the Antoine Dupont Wankfest, because that is a critical part of rugby terminology. But just being able to put 60 metres on box kicks over both sides and invite a really good chase up was so crucial. Yeah. Just in small tactical ways, France blew past and denied Japan being able to do that thing they do, or have done for the first 15, 20 minutes of games so effectively. They couldn't do it at all.
When we had the Six Nations, everyone was going does Galtier need to go? I was always going, no.
Yeah.
They're obviously missing Dupont. I think they're missing Ontamak more. And I kind of stand by that, but also Dupont being back does make a massive difference. What you're saying about the tactical kicking. Yeah. I mean, this is the coldest take anyone's ever offered, is that France are better with
the best player in the world
rather than Maxime Lucu. But as you say, there's the length on the kicks. There was early on when he put that pass in for Atisogbe, where it was like the rugby equivalent of a through ball. He passed it over the defence, knowing that if Atisogbe just runs that curved line, he's in space. You know, I think Ramos was exceptional. Every touch on the ball, he was so eager to send it wide, but in the knowledge that his pack will always send him forward as well. And there is that all-court game to what France are doing. for Louis Bielbiaré playing on the left wing there, in the first sort of 5 minutes, he already had 5 or 6 touches and a couple of tries, you know? Like, it's an absolute dream day to be a winger like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he was just touching the ball all the time, in loads of space, loads of time to make decisions, putting kicks over, skinning around people.
And it just showed how easily and how well France had built that depth. And people have criticised their decision to use the summer tours as development tours all the time. But how often are we seeing these players come in and adapt, right? Yeah. And they get a bit of a taste during the summer. And on every one of those development tours, they've won a test at least. And then they come into the autumn and they've got a bit of confidence. It's not as overawing, even though they are playing the Stade de France for the first time. And they play with confidence and they play like themselves, like they do at club level.
Speaking of the French backline, how at home did Moefana and Gaetan look like as a centre combo?
Yeah, so we had this conversation on the Saturday night, but I was increasingly not rating Moefana. I think he's had a pretty rough year or so where he only really looks good against smaller teams or in games where Bordeaux are like completely dominant.
I really like your Moefana.
I just think he's started to look a bit like one-dimensional in a backwards way. Normally people talk about
he just kind of like force things a little bit, run sideways, like from the 12 channel.
When people normally talk about players being one-dimensional, they mean, oh, they just crash it up all the time or they just kick it. But like he's one-dimensional and he only really does like really flashy attack stuff.
Sure.
You know?
I
think actually he's clearly bulked up a bit over the summer.
He was much more direct on Saturday, wasn't he?
And he played a more direct game, and I actually thought it really suited him, and it allowed...
Do you think it was a case of, like, he knows that Jonathan Danty's not been picked because he's off form? Yeah. So there is a vacancy there.
Yeah.
If he, bulks up, runs his weight a little bit more, contests a few more breakdowns, you know? And obviously Fiku was put on the bench because they clearly wanted to test out what Gaetan's like. They've got Paul Cost on the squad who's knocking on the door, no doubt. They've got so much depth in that position. So I think he's kind of realised,
I thought Gaetan was really good.
Yeah.
There is a big question mark over who you play in the centres next week against New Zealand.
They've got too many options. So many options.
Yeah, because I think the rest of the team you can sort of pick quite easily, you know? I think there's a chance that Rouma stays in at 7.
He deserves it.
I think he's been superb.
He's not played badly for France.
He'd be a big call. But yeah, it's otherwise the team largely picks itself.
Yeah.
Except for midfield.
Yeah.
Right? You know, Peno comes back in on the wing. You probably keep Ramos at 10 and Baye at fullback. But then midfield, I don't know who you pick. Yeah. You can go any number of players. And it's both a great thing they've got loads of options, but also no one has nailed their place down. Fiku probably comes back in and starts, but who does he partner? I'd probably go with Gaetan.
I'd like to see Gaetan.
Yeah.
I'd like to see Cost, but it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Against the All Blacks, it's probably too big a risk as well.
Yeah. But then again, like, he just seems like the sort of guy that you gamble on.
And you can win a European Cup.
I don't know,
But just to touch on Japan quickly.
Look at Japan quickly.
Yeah.
Their main USP under Eddie Jones has been their ruck speed, right?
Yeah.
A stat came up towards the end of the game that their rucks were roughly twice as fast as France's.
Wow.
And yet, they still can't breach that defence.
Yeah.
Is that just a Sean Edwards thing, or is that something to be concerned about from a Japanese perspective?
I think they have much more difficulty there than they have in past games against the All Blacks and England. Where I think against the All Blacks, their attack looked absolutely brilliant, and England as well, but their defence was just woeful, and they switched off way too easily, and they got turned around and thrown off with relative ease in a way that was really worrying. But also, we've got to remember, at the end of the day, this is an Eddie Jones team, right? And what do Eddie Jones teams do? They peak at World Cups.
Yeah.
And we are seeing a quarter of what this team will be by 2027. And if they are brilliant in the first 20 minutes, and this is a quarter of what the team will be, I think there's a decent chance that he probably tries to do the same thing Jamie Joseph did and get the entire team out for 6 months before the World Cup to prep, get them properly fit, get them, lined up and playing his style of rugby, and get the key players like really on board. I think we had a bit of a conversation about this on Saturday night, but I think they missed Nagare, the scrum half.
Oh, big time.
Who is brilliant, who is, alongside Jeremy Skimpton Park, one of the best scrum halves in the world at playing quick ball.
Yeah. My theory on Naito Saito is that he is like a top-end international level number 21, right?
Yes. Yeah,
he's your bench scrum half, he's your injection of pace, because his decision-making on attack is fantastic, but if his pack's going backwards, sometimes he will make errors with his passing, with his kicking, just with his delivery of the ball and so on, right? I think he's a fantastic player. I love watching him play. And, since going to Toulouse, that, in a way, it's the best and worst thing for him. Because it's great to play in a team like that. You'll learn a lot, you'll improve a lot, but also at the same time, you don't play in a backwards going pack when you're playing for Toulouse. you're always playing behind, a load of the best players in the world. You've got Cyril Bay up front for you.
As Tomo Ramos demonstrates weekly, with players who can adjust to your every mad decision, whim or mistake.
Yeah. So that's a difficult one, but you're right. Nagare is the game manager for Japan. And I think for a team like Japan, what we'd class as game management is very different.
Yeah.
You think of a game managing 9, you think of somebody who slows it down, who kicks it well. But I think for Japan, it is knowing which kind of rehearsed play to pull out when. Exactly what tempo to put on the ball, because it's going to be really quick.
That pretty much tells you why he's recalled Tatakawa at 10. Veteran at 36 years old, maybe even 37. And he's brought him back in, having not played for Japan in, 4 or 5 years?
More than that,
and because he was dropped in maybe 2017.
Yeah.
And back then he was a ball-playing 12, right? And they've now moved him in as a kind of old game management 10. Scored a brilliant try, that superb was brilliantly taken.
I thought he played quite well.
I thought he played well, but they clearly want him to be a calm head. And I don't think Eddie Jones is looking at him as a guy he's going to take to a World Cup as the starting 10.
Yeah.
But I think he's clearly going, okay, this is a guy to manage the rest of this team around him.
I think no one's under any illusion that this is not the finished article for Japan.
Yes.
That they're a long way off, that this is very much something Eddie is building. As you say, I think he probably needs somebody else who can manage in the midfield with him at 12. Dylan Riley's an absolute baller at 13, by the way. He is such an entertaining player to watch. But I think Japan are very much a work in progress. I think no one's under any illusion around that. But they need a couple more years for sure.
We've put it off long enough. Canada. Look, I'm wearing a Chile shirt today to commemorate their incredible win. 4 years ago, it was one of the biggest upsets in the sport's history that Chile beat Canada. It was considered a huge upset. They were ahead at 80 minutes and then Canada had to kick that final minute penalty through Robbie Povey, right? Now, they're smashing them. They're putting close to 50 points on them. Probably should have been 50 points, but they kicked a penalty towards the end instead of going for the corner. And they left plenty of tries out there.
Yeah.
And yet it just kind of feels like the result we expected.
And you say about they're ahead on the 80th minute,
Yeah.
right, was kind of the story a few years ago. It took till the 80th minute for Canada to score a single try, in this game.
Yeah.
Right at the very end. It's so difficult to think of a positive for Canada here.
Yeah.
There's so much we have to kind of dance around with this.
I think there's a period of about 8 minutes where they were in the game early on, So shortly after Chile got into a lead, scored their first try, Canada then had a short period, it's literally about 7 or 8 minutes, where they managed to control some of the play. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not even talking about scoring points. They do manage to score the 2 penalties in that period. But it's the only period of the game over the full 80 where they were the team in control of what's happening, right? And I don't want to focus on Canada too much because I think Chile deserve a lot of attention because they were fantastic. But just again, as people that care about Canadian rugby, it is so heartbreaking week after week to watch them do this. And I think you mentioned where did the positives come from in Canada. I think there's one huge positive here, which is that we are one day close to Kingsley Jones leaving.
Yeah.
Because once again, he is doing... he may well stay in the job forever, right? But at some point, we're going to reach the heat death of the universe. And at that point, surely they can't carry on.
Climate change is the biggest positive for Canadian rugby.
Yeah. Taylor Swift took a jet somewhere, and therefore we're slightly closer to Kingsley Jones no longer being able to coach a team. Honestly, Kingsley Jones is doing the worst job of any coach in the history of international rugby at the moment of Canada. And I don't know he has so little shame as to continue doing this job.
Yeah.
As I say, Canada were just toothless and pathetic. And the players are trying, man. But they're... Lucas Rumble was brilliant. I thought Quattrin was very, very good.
I really like Quattrin.
And again, Andrew Coe was giving his everything, and at one point, did some great shithousery, rubbing a player's head as they're being told off, and but you just kind of look at them, and they're coached with no dynamism or innovation. It's so dull, and then you compare it to what Chile are doing, and the way in which they have evolved over the last 4 years from this team who were broadly a great pack who worked incredibly hard, and yet had some really fun backs, to now being a team that is led by those backs with the forwards as the kind of smaller, entity there. And I thought, friend of the channel, our boy Raimundo Martinez.
Oh, what a boy.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely phenomenal. I'm not sure I don't know who was player of the match. Should have been
He was
Raimundo,
our player of the match.
Phenomenal. Absolutely brilliant. And then the rest of the team just slotted in effortlessly. And we saw them just evolve and look like a better and evolved team versus what they were a year ago?
Yeah, so I want to kind of yo-yo this a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how brilliant Chile were, then we'll go back to Canada in a minute. Okay, so yeah, I'd kind of forgotten just how entertaining Chile were.
Yeah.
Because I always remember that they are a really dogged team who fight for each other, which is still true. But you watch them and you go, oh my God, this is one of the most exciting backlines I've seen. Moving Villathela into the 12 channel.
That really works.
It's inspired.
That really works.
I really like that.
Again, he's bulked up a little bit.
Yeah.
He's a bigger guy than he was a year ago.
Yeah.
And it's just like giving him extra dimension.
He's got a real range of
ball
kicks.
player, this kicking option. You know, it's really developed their game.
And him and Saavedra work really well off each other.
Yeah.
I think Saavedra had a fantastic game.
Defensively as well, Saavedra was everywhere. Just him flying out a line. There's one where he's like, there's a Canadian forward about to carry here, and he's on the 13 channel, and he shoots out like that and just takes him by the legs and drops him to the ground way beforehand. I thought he was absolutely superb, especially defensively.
But I do think, obviously, the one main weakness of Rodrigo Fernandez's game at 10 is...
too much balling.
Yes, but that's it. It's like it's a little bit of his kind of kicking game management stuff. And I do think that if Villathela settles into that 12 channel, that could really work and take a load of pressure off Fernandez.
Yeah.
And again, like it's such a well-balanced back line. They ended up with both Gareth Fuliches on the wings, which is also exciting. And also like, Ayartse's mental at the back. Yeah. And he had such a good game.
There's so many of the little breaks and things he's doing, and like now having the chance to play in the top 14, it's rounding out his game more, you know?
Big time.
Because he was a really talented player who had gaps in his game. Yeah. And actually him now getting game time now he's at Van and he's getting to play in the top 14, you know, fairly regularly. Mostly on the wing rather than a fullback, but it still allowed him to just develop and round out the rough edges in his game.
Yeah.
And this Chile team just continued to develop at such a rate. And it was funny looking at this game and the Uruguay-Spain game overlapped. So kind of the last 20 minutes of this, I was watching the first 20 minutes of the Uruguay-Spain game. And just shouting Vamos to cheer for everyone but Canada and apologising, which was the Canadian end. Looking at them, and you look at these two teams next to each other, and obviously Spain are much better opposition than Canada these days, which would have felt mad to say 8 years ago. Yeah. But then you just say Kings Jones takes over and you go, oh, okay, that makes sense. But Chile's ceiling feels much higher than Uruguay's, which I think is quite exciting. Yeah, because they're only at the start of their journey. You know? And so far, it's a good and a bad thing that we're still looking at the same crop of players that we originally had. You know, the next one is still yet to come through. Hopefully they do come through is kind of the concern, but No, but we've seen a few, you know, like Torre Alba being on the bench, a few of those kind of, you know, and obviously Gareth Fuliches coming off the bench as well. A few of those players from last year are now already starting to have to fight for their place because they've got more and more young options coming through.
Taking different roles in the team.
Yeah, we're only a year on from that first debut and 2 years on from the qualifying, but I'm so excited by where they're going. Yeah. And I just think they were brilliant to watch. I had such a good time just watching them attack. And they were just like relentless. And the first half, they left a lot of tries out there. They made a lot of errors early on. But it just shows how far there is to come. And the fact they sorted those errors out and they put it right in the second half and they scored so many points, scored 40-odd points, was just a brilliant sign
it's really
of
satisfying.
How well coached they are, how malleable they are, what great players they are. Yeah.
There's, for example, like Matthias Garafulos's try is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Really, really satisfying try to watch with Rodrigo Fernandez kind of running that up. But there does come a point where you have to go, is this just a glorified training run for Chile? Because is the opposition actually challenging them? Yeah. And I felt like Chile weren't at their top gear. You know, they were kind of in second gear the whole time.
But the thing you've got to remember with this is, right, who are they playing for that second America spot in the World Cup?
It's a fair point. It's a fair point.
It'll probably be Canada.
Yeah. But you look at trials like this one in particular, right, for Nicolas Garafulic on the wing, where Canada just aren't sure what defensive system they're running. You know, it takes one short carry, and then suddenly, right here, you've got 3 men in the Chilean back line, and like half the Canadian team watching them, but not really in positions. Because Rodrigo Fernandez's line is not holding a defender here. There is nobody running a hard line off Ayartse here. They have not got anybody to hold this whole massive group of defenders. They're just not sure what defensive system they're running. All of these Canadian defenders have their eyes on Ayartse. Yeah. They are not watching the man on the outside whatsoever. And so they just go for simple hands to beat them. And sure, it's really good width by Saavedra and great positioning on the wing by Garafulic, but in what world are you looking at and going like, yeah, this team could go to a World Cup?
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing in training?
What are they doing in training is the thing that comes up when you watch Canada. You know, time after time, you go, these are talented players who are giving everything on the day.
Yeah.
And yet they're not running systems, they don't have plays, they don't set up in a certain way. You know, they don't look like they've got an idea how they're supposed to be playing.
Last week, I did an analysis session with my Colts team that I coach at amateur level, talking about looking up from the breakdown.
Yeah.
And, like, scanning and seeing who's opposite you. And I've just said the same thing about an international team. And a good international, what should be a good international team, that are full of really good players.
But this is the thing, right? You bring in a coach who should be coaching at Welsh Prem level, and you promote them all the way up to international rugby, and the team is going to play like a Welsh Prem team.
Yeah.
But hey, we talked about Canada enough. Chile, the boys, vamos. So excited to see them carrying on. And again, World Cup qualification around the corner, they're looking really strong for it.
Yeah,
they're looking potentially at beating out Uruguay for that second spot.
It's tasty.
So this game took place in Romania because why wouldn't it? Part of a doubleheader with Romania versus Tonga. They're doing, as they did 2 years ago, a little round-robin tournament out there, which I like. You know, you have the big teams have obviously split off and created the Autumn Nation Series for their games, and I quite like the Tier 2 teams coming together and doing their own little thing at the same time to overlap in it. I like that as a system.
They are the big teams to me.
They're the even bigger teams.
Yes.
Yes, that's how we view it here.
Because look at the bloody Romanian pack.
Yeah.
Look how big those lads are.
So, really interesting game between Tonga and Romania, because Tonga, you can tell they have changed their approach from the World Cup. The pace they're playing with, the kind of increased ruck speed come up enormously. But a bit like we're talking about with Japan, they couldn't keep it up, right? And again, it becomes the Mike Tyson thing, right? Everyone's got a plan to get punched in the face. Everyone's got a plan to get punched in the face. Everyone's got a plan.
In boxing, I guess you do.
I guess so. You've got to be ready for it.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And it had a big sting of that, right? Because Tonga were superb for their tries, great value, played with real pace, real intensity, you know, getting their carriers into proper space, playing wider than they were in the World Cup, playing much more aggressive and kind of fast rugby. And then Romania happened. And Romania's pack just shut them down and played them off the pitch. Just the sheer physicality of them was brilliant.
Bear in mind, these two teams played opposite each other in the World Cup last year, you know. Obviously, Tonga had a much stronger starting 15.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual players and personnel they had, it was extremely different as a proposition. But I was, as you say, like pleasantly surprised by how Tonga played, because I kind of felt in the World Cup last year they slightly coasted off having almost a world-class starting 15, you know.
Yeah.
That you're looking at, they had Peter Aki, they had Salesi Pietal, you know, they have all of these world-class players playing for them, Vai Fafita and so on. And that kind of felt like that was their game, you know. Whereas this time around, as you say, there was a genuine plan, they had a bit of a kicking game to them, they had a bit of a phase play kind of game with their ruck speed and so on. But as you say, the Romanian pack proved too strong in the end.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing, like Romania had two really good packs, you know, they had one on the bench as well. Almost a bomb squad, almost.
Yeah. What is Romanian for bomb squad?
I don't know.
You keep talking, I'll look it up.
Alexandru Savan, I think, is a fantastic player for Romania. He's kind of like the person who impresses me most at loose head prop. Bing.
Echipida de bomb.
Nice. Yeah, the most impressive thing in this game I really want to talk about is how good is Hinkley Valvassa at 10.
Hinkley Valvassa's finish on that try, and I think there'll probably be a bunch of people watching this who haven't seen it, phenomenal.
How good
Just
is
have a
this?
look at this from every possible angle as we're going to play over the top here.
We'll just play this on repeat.
Just on a repeat, just on repeat. Maybe that's what we call the show, is Hinkley Valvassa's finish.
Yes.
His lawyers won't sue us, right?
No.
It is brilliant. And again, there's that moment of it all looking like it's gone pear-shaped and him just playing on, you know, and playing to the whistle.
The way he manages to get his feet in the air as he has two Tongan tacklers coming to like slam them down, that is outstanding in itself. The transfer of the ball into his right hand, and the temptation feels like to go for the full 180 rugby league style overhead finish, but no, he completely keeps his composure. This is incredible. It's
a huge game for both teams, I think, right? Because Tonga, we can see the development, we can see them moving forward, we can start to imagine what they'll look like when they bring the likes of Peter Aki into this team, you know? And who knows what All Blacks will declare for them in the next few years. But Romania, I think there was a lot of talk at the last World Cup that this was the end of Romanian rugby, right? That they've been on this downfall, obviously didn't make 2019 for various reasons. Most of them are disqualification based. And then there was a lot of talk then of like, will they make it? Will they not? They snuck into 2023. And then, obviously having had the revival of Andy Robinson. Robinson goes. We still don't know the full story there. And they just didn't perform. They looked poor. And you kind of felt like, well, this is it, isn't it? And actually, to see them come back and play so well and pretty comprehensively.
And with an identity as well.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing that's most satisfying for me, that ever since they lost the likes of Soren Sokol, Marius Tinku, Mihita Lazar, ever since these guys all retired, you kind of thought like, oh, what are Romania now?
Yeah.
Are they just coasting through Florin Vlaicu? Just waiting for him to do something? He retires and it's like, what have they got left?
And actually, they've got this team coming through who play with exactly that same identity.
Yeah.
It feels like watching a rebirth of that great Romanian team from the noughties. I say great, obviously the 80s team being the greatest Romanian team ever. And, they gave a bunch of big teams proper games, most famous the All Blacks in the 60s. But whether they'll go on to be as good as that, I don't know. But I think we've got a generation of Romanian players coming through here who can be serious international rugby players, make several World Cups, and hopefully start to pressure Georgia and Portugal. And, there was a lot of talk again around the World Cup that Portugal will be the second European team now.
Yeah.
And it's great to see Romania come forward and go, not so fast.
One of the most promising players for me is Alan Konecki at 9. He's a real special player.
Yeah.
And again, we've just talked about Valvassa. He can play anywhere in the back line from 10 through to 15. And it is a case of like, how do they get the best out of him? At the moment, it probably is 10 because it gets him most balls and most decisions he can possibly make because he's razor sharp. But yeah, at the same time, like they've got play that they can bring into that position. He can manage the game a little bit, move Valvassa out to maybe 13 or something. And Konecki can play 10 himself as well.
Yeah.
So whether
it was great there.
Because Rapanu's such a good 9 as well.
I thought Rapanu made a difference when he came on. I thought he was very good.
Yeah. He's probably a little bit quicker than Konecki.
Yeah.
But Konecki, he's got such a skill set. He's one of those players who looks like he doesn't think about the game. He just makes the right decision all the time.
Yes, yeah.
And I love that about him. He's so young as well.
Also think great decision to make Simonescu your captain.
Yeah.
As a guy who lives and breathes this, And again, the stories are out there of him having quite a rough upbringing and then finding rugby and loving it. And they've kind of built an identity around him, I feel, because he felt like an odd choice to make your flashy fullback the captain.
Yeah, big time.
But actually, you kind of look at him as a character and what he represents. And yes, that is what Romania want and need. And so he's become
a star.
That. Yeah.
He is a star in the way he plays.
And so I think that's an inspired decision. An incredibly, incredibly talented, hard-working guy who really cares about playing for his country here.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm
so excited for
by this.
Romania. Yeah.
This has been that was the big surprise of the weekend for me.
Yeah.
And I think, do want to touch on the other couple of big surprises.
Big time.
Because Zimbabwe, mate. Zimbabwe absolutely smashed the UAE. Now, the last time they played, there was 4 points in it.
Yeah.
Right? This Zimbabwe team are serious.
The surprise is less the result and more the personnel.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the personnel, but it's also the manner in which Zimbabwe played.
Sure.
I think the style they played with and the accuracy as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is aided by, as I'm sure you're going to mention, a couple of the names on the team sheet.
So, people who watched a lot of Super Rugby in the 2010s, the thing is, this sounds like I'm taking the piss here, but these are two fantastic players. I'm definitely a big fan of them. I think you're a big fan of them both. So, Ian Pryor, formerly Australian, halfback, plays 10 or 9, fantastic game managing halfback, has declared for Zimbabwe. Is a kind of player/coach, isn't he?
Yeah.
With intentions of getting them to the World Cup.
Yeah. Was playing 10 at the weekend and pulled the strings really, really well. So the scrum half Mudariki, who was the captain as well, I thought looked really sharp. And actually two of them played off each other really well. And as the game went on, they did move Pryor into 9 and bring in the other star player they brought in Kyle Godwin. Who obviously had a long career in Australia, played in Connacht in Ireland as well.
Got a couple of caps for the Wallabies as well.
Yeah, and he's a fantastic player.
Yeah.
And he came off the bench. But I think the big story is less the two new guys that have come in and more what they've managed to get out of some of the players around them. Because, Edward Sagake might be everyone watching's favourite player by this time next week.
Hell yeah.
Because he is phenomenal. Scored a hat-trick from the wing. Trevor Garway on the other wing as well was also brilliant, just electric, fast. But Sagake, man, like, he's superb.
He's so good. His acceleration off the mark is unreal. And also, he plays so tight to the touchline at all times and always backs himself to get that. And sure, you know, if they get to a World Cup or whatever, he might come up against some wingers who will take him into touch or whatever.
Yeah.
But he takes that chance, and I love that about him.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's now got these two players who will distribute the ball to him all day long and will get him as many touches as they physically can will really, really benefit Sagake.
So Zimbabwe won the Rugby Africa Trophy this year. The winner next year automatically qualifies for the World Cup, right? So that puts enormous pressure on, but also opens an incredible opportunity for Zimbabwe. And I think this is a team who can dare to dream of qualifying for the World Cup for the first time since 1991.
And by the way, I just want to quickly say, I think it is brilliant that Ian Pryor and Kyle Godwin, as two high-profile players, have declared for the nation that, you know, they figure needs a bit of help.
Yeah.
In the latter days, you know, as they're both getting into their 30s now, that they've both done this, right?
Yeah.
I was delighted that Richard Hardwick went to Namibia last year for the World Cup. I think that is a brilliant thing. And we've talked so many times before about how there are loads of like high-profile rugby players who are qualified for Zimbabwe that have never thought about touching them before. So, Senator David Pocock, the ball's in your court.
The beast. Come on.
Yeah.
What,
Dave Denton,
coward.
come on, do it. Do it. Anyway.
The other little surprise from the weekend, again, not in the results but in the manner, was Brazil pretty comprehensively beating Hong Kong. Now, because the second Asian spot open now, Hong Kong are looking at going to a World Cup, and yet Brazil made you wonder, why have World Rugby screwed over the South American teams again? Which I think they unequivocally have in that qualification. Partly because they want the USA to be going, but also, like, I think they've just underrated the number of serious teams in there.
Yeah.
Because Brazil were fantastic and dominant, right? And you look at that team and they are building something serious.
This is another game where I've only got to see the highlights of
yeah.
it. But once again, it's similar to what we're saying about Romania in that it's a backs-based kind of like identity that is then kind of a distraction from how massive and physical their pack are, right? Also, delighted to see that my boy Moses Duque is still going in the centres. He's absolutely fantastic, so balanced. But again, like, they have a huge front row, a huge second row, who...
Gabriel Oliveira, their lock, who is enormous and scored a brilliant try.
Yes,
He is huge, turn of pace. Honestly, if he isn't playing in France or somewhere else, by the end of this World Cup cycle, something has gone very, very wrong. And the other player I want to mention, Lucas Traquez at fullback, who has an absolute metronome of a boot, man. He's able to slot penalties from basically anywhere in the half. And when you're at the level Brazil are at, right, that is invaluable.
Yeah.
And suddenly, they were having this game where they were on top pretty much the entire way, but having someone who can slot 3 points from anywhere within 50-odd metres, including in the corners, just effortlessly. Apparently he played football till he was at quite a advanced age. And then took up rugby and basically just found goal kicking really easy. Just for, in comparison to the way he's kicking a football before that, as a Brazilian. And just is a phenomenal goal kicker.
You say that's really valuable at the level Brazil are at. It's a valuable skill at where they want to be, right? When you get to qualification games and so on, no penalties in your half.
Yeah.
If you've got somebody who finds goal kicking as easy as this guy does, that's brilliant.
So Lucas Traquez, the fullback. Superb. Really
and also, for Hong Kong, great to see Matt Worley get on the score sheet for them. Brilliant winger from Bedford Blues. He's a fantastic, really solid winger. Really quick.
Championship stalwart, doing bits at international level.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
It's great to see. And now we move on to a smaller game between two minnow teams.
Yeah.
That I've only heard of one of these teams. I did watch the game, but I'd never heard of the other one before that.
I haven't heard of either of them.
So you know Scotland?
Yeah.
You know where it is? Yeah.
Yeah.
They played against somewhere cool. I'm just going to check this. South Africa.
Okay, never heard of it.
No. So the Springboks played against Scotland.
Can we talk about Matt Worley again?
Should we talk about Matt Worley for half an hour? So Scotland played against South Africa.
Yes, they did.
We're going to finish on this.
I've gotten a lot of shit on Twitter for my take on this game.
Yes.
Which is that I think the exact scoreline that, because it was the end of this game, is the exact scoreline that the game deserved, right? And granted, I think a reason why people are mad about that is because they don't realise that I don't factor, this refereeing decision was wrong, because it wasn't, whatever it was. Yeah, rugby's an 80-minute game, right? And South Africa scoring that pushover try at the very end, right, was getting more and more inevitable with every scrum that was happening, right? Because they broke Scotland down at the scrum so heavily. And that was the reason why South Africa deserved to win the game, was their set piece. Because as the game went on, Xander Fagerson started to struggle more and more with Oxenshea, right? The whole bomb squad rolls on at that point. Eventually, Fagerson has to hang in there for sort of 60-odd minutes. Elliot Mills comes on, and God bless him, he had a torrid time at scrum time. And every scrum for South Africa gets more and more destructive. Started off for Fagerson, it was like, I'm holding my own. Then it was, I'm just going to give away a penalty, it's just the ball's at the back. And then by the end of the game, it was, we're going to march them forward 5 metres and get scrum penalties that way. And yeah, with each in every passing scrum, it just became, this scrum is so good it deserves 3 points, and they kicked it. Then it became, this scrum is so good it deserves 7 points. And so you can't argue, a lot of South African fans have said, I think we played poorly. I think that's fair enough, because Scotland did a lot to limit them, and there were moments where you thought Scotland could come and win the game, which obviously the Springboks at the absolute peak of their powers would always beat Scotland. But at the same time, they did well to wear them down by the 80th minute,
I think the most impressive thing for this, from a Springbok point of view, is that this will not be a game that anyone talks about in 5 years' time, which sounds like a weird point of praise, but the Springboks' current aim is to be, I think the current aim is to be the second best team of all time, with the goal of then, by the next World Cup, stepping up to be the best team there's ever been.
Sure.
Right?
Unequivocally.
Unequivocally. At the minute, they're somewhere in the top 5. And it's quite hard to argue. They're in there, the kind of early
They're
noughties
almost
England,
definitely in the top
70s Wales, the kind of a number of New Zealand teams as well. But the thing they've always had is this South Africa team wins the games they need to win, but they don't win every game.
Yeah.
They slip up in the odd game. And this felt, it had the energy of the sort of game where they would have slipped up 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And instead, it became a routine victory. It easily could have been like that, now famous Scotland-New Zealand game where Stuart Hogg makes that break down the touchline, almost scores, clearly only going so fast because he's running away from his kids, and Bowden Barrett makes that unbelievable tackle on him, saves the try, saves the game. But that was almost Scotland's first
and
ever
ruins
win
Stuart
over
Hogg's
England.
life, yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he did that to himself. That was so almost the moment, and that still comes up. That's still talked about all the time.
Yeah.
Right? And this easily could have been one of those games that Scotland fans bring up as we almost beat the Springboks, or we did beat the Springboks.
Yeah.
And instead, they shut it down, and they were just superb.
Yeah.
And they didn't play well, and that's why they were so good.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense at all.
But at the same time,
this was not a vintage Springbok performance. It was a routine Springbok performance.
Yeah. And on the flip side, as somebody who was watching that game and cheering for Scotland, you look at that and go you can say the Springboks played badly, but they're not the team who conceded that Thomas du Toit try.
Exactly.
That felt so preventable, And again, obviously there was that brilliant Ben White run-in, which then, got called back, and there was Hugh Jones knocking it on. And there's really small mistakes like that. And again, when Pimpy scored that second try, beautiful by Villy LaRue, doing that little dink over the top, the kind of sideways Rugby 2011 dink. That's incredible. But when that came in, you kind of thought, damn, I felt they would have come back before that happened,
I said this at the time, but I kind of felt like the Springboks had 2 more of those moments like the LaRue one in them at the time, And it turns out they didn't. It turns out they only had the scrum try. From a Scotland point of view, you can't win a test match if you are neither ruthless nor physical.
Yeah.
And I thought physically, defensively, Scotland were up to the task.
Massively.
And they were superb in that area. I thought they carried well, and they managed to generate some opportunities like that. But at scrum, at maul, at line out, set piece, and whenever it came down to big moments of stopping the Springboks, they just couldn't do it.
And accuracy of finishing tries as well.
Yeah. Scotland took this approach of chipping away, of constantly kicking penalties, of just keeping in the game. That is naive if every time either team knocks it on in your half, it's 3 points to the opposition. Because you've got Pollard in that form and you've got that scrum.
Yeah. And they had one golden opportunity to be really bold and brave and win the game.
Yes.
And they go for goal instead.
This is the big one.
I get why they did it. Because if they go for the scrum, they're probably getting turned over. If they go for the line out, you're having to out-jump Franco Mostert, right?
And then out-maul
Yes,
the Boks,
which is difficult. And I understand the logic, again, like let's say they tap and go and they knock it on, right? And South Africa probably get a scrum pen, go the distance, right? They will be ruining that and going, oh, why didn't they go for goal and trip away at them, right? It's one of those situations where you can't really win.
And there is, to their credit, right, from the kickoff, they do win a penalty off the clearance kick and they kick down the line. And for a moment, you kind of thought, okay, it's paid off. Like, they've got 2 chances instead of one.
Max Williamson, fantastic.
Yes.
Carry on.
Well, Mapimpi's in the bin as well for this. And then they lose the line out and it comes down again to set piece. And Scotland it's so frustrating. They're still in the same place that they've been in for so long now, where they are brilliant, but every game they seem to have a different Achilles heel that comes back and bites them. And this game it was a scrum and the line out. And in past games it's been bits of the defence, or it's been them, throwing intercept passes, or it's been them doing this, that, the other. And you felt like the big issue ultimately is they aren't ruthless.
Yes.
They don't take their chances when they come up. And they don't have that kind of sixth sense. The thing I talked about with England last week is they don't have that sixth sense for when the moment to go for the kill is, to go for the throat. And the Springboks do, You look at them chipping away, eating their momentum, but then every time they went for the corner, they turned it into pressure and points, and they took, effort out of them, and then managed to, put doubt in the mind and score more than they would have otherwise.
When you think about that time when Rossi Erasmus was asked, would you take Finn Russell over Handré Pollard? And he goes, Finn Russell's a great rugby player, but no, I want to win games, right?
Yes, exactly.
That thing you were just saying about knowing when to go to the kit for the kill, you could argue that is the only area, goal kicking and physicality and so on, where Handré Pollard is better.
Area.
The biggest area where Handré Pollard is better than Finn Russell. In terms of like deft skills, Finn Russell is undoubtedly a better player. But the killer instinct that wins you rugby games and more importantly wins you World Cups is the thing that Handré Pollard has more than any 10 maybe ever.
And I thought it was a performance the Springboks will forget about, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
That they came on this tour, they beat Scotland, one of the, we're looking at them as 6th team in the world, right? And they beat them without breaking much of a sweat. And if they are to climb towards that All Blacks level, that is what they want to be doing, is being comprehensive in the manner in which they beat these teams.
100%.
And they didn't look panicked at any stage. They didn't look worried about Scotland beating them at any point in the match. They just looked confident that they were going to do this and were going to take this home. And every error they made, or every moment they perhaps made a decision or something we're not used to seeing them do, which I don't think were that many, But I just thought they put them right and they just looked assured and confident and fine.
Yeah.
And it was, a really reassuring game from a South African point of view.
Yeah, and it's a sad one to say because, as I say, I would have loved Scotland to do that. But South Africa, in all the physical assets of the game, scrum line out and so on, more, they're a 10% better team than Scotland in those areas. At least.
Scrum, 40.
Yes, exactly. And it's such a difficult thing to kind of say and to take, but sadly that's what it came down to.
I do kind of think the biggest test of their tour is the next one, is England. Because everyone will talk about, England lost to Australia, that's fine. I think what we're looking at with England, and this will come up when we do the video on them, is a team who are just like this. And we saw it last year, right? In that they almost beat the Springboks in the semi-final, and they were brilliant in the World Cup itself, so comprehensive in both games against Argentina, and yet they lost to Fiji.
Yeah.
And the Six Nations, they beat Ireland. They were, so close to beating France. They were ahead with 3 minutes to go, 2 minutes to go even, and yet they almost lost to Italy.
Yeah.
And they almost lost to Wales. I think England are a big match team.
Yeah.
And I think they'll turn up for every big occasion and be brilliant against the big teams. But they're probably going to lose a few more games to teams like Australia and Wales and Fiji.
It will happen. So you can laugh at that, but
this is where I just think they are. I just think England are going to be brilliant in the big games and they're going to lose some small games. And that's sort of the Borthwick way they're going to go. Is he's going to get them pumped up for these games. And I can see them absolutely beating South Africa.
When was the last time England weren't competitive?
Last week? No, yeah.
No, but they were.
No, they were.
That it doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
They're always in the fight, and sure, they've come out on the wrong side of it, which is a thing that definitely needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Like, you can't make any bones about it. But I don't know, man. I just think if you're in the fight against the Springboks, that's half the battle.
Yeah.
And that's the battle that everyone fails at,
Yeah. If I was a South African fan, I would be looking at next week as the big one, as the biggest test of this tour. And I'd be really interested to see how that goes.
Yeah. Big test at Allianz Twickenham. I can't wait for it.
No one who isn't being paid calls it.
And even they're not really trying.
Yeah. That's been great fun.
Yeah.
Is them always going, their first try in Twickenham, Allianz Stadium.
Yes. In the Twickenham postcode.
Maybe that's what we call it, the Twickenham postcode.
Rugby HQ, that's already a thing.
Rugby HQ, no, that's good. Should we do it?
Taken.
Should we call it Scrum 5? It's a good piece
Should we
of
call
imagery.
it? Wait, should we call it Rugby?
Should we call it, hold on, Rugby Special?
Da, 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 da.
Da, 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 da.